Luke 14, starting at verse 1. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained quiet. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And they had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, we're going to read on partway through the message, but I want to stop there for now. Lord, speak to us from your word. Speak to our hearts and our minds and our lives. And Lord, we pray that the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts would be pleasing in your sight. You are our rock and our redeemer. As we've been talking about the last several weeks, meals were a big part of Jesus' ministry. We talked about how he ate with tax collectors and sinners, and how we are called to welcome people that society might say, those are bad people. Then the next week we talked about Jesus showing up at a Pharisee's house. He's invited to dinner. A sinful woman, well known as sinful, showed up. And Jesus calls us to not only welcome her, but to see ourselves in her. And he talks about the fact that it's important that we realize that we have been forgiven of so much. And last week, Jesus fed the 5,000. And we had to ask the question, who is Jesus? And that was just screamed clearly by the word. Notice something, though, as we dive into Luke 14. What was eaten was irrelevant. When the 5,000 are fed, there are loaves and fish, but that's not the point. There's no point at which we're supposed to learn, oh, it was fish, therefore we should eat fish. That's not what it means. What's talked about there is the power of the host. And in our society, what we eat is important to us sometimes. I mean, there are restaurants that will charge you $50, $70, $100 a plate, largely based on presentation, plating, we call it. Now, I will tell you, I don't care at all what my food looks like. I mean, if I listed my top 5 foods, none of them would be pretty. And none of them would require garnish. But what matters in the Bible is not what we eat, it's what happens around the table. It's about the relational dynamics, about the conversation, about the connections that happen. And I think that all of us, if we claim Jesus as our Savior, or if we've been claimed by Jesus as our Savior, then we know that it would be better to eat Domino's pizza and have Jesus be the focus than to eat the best steak ever at kind of a relational distance. In light of that, this passage is intriguing because it doesn't tell us at all what anybody's eating, but Jesus is all about the guest list. He's all about who we eat with, who we invite. Now, I got to tell you, if you're a cognitive doctrine person, this message won't be a lot of like cognitive brain doctrine. You know, we won't be wrestling with the nature of the Trinity or the dual nature. You know, we're not going to be talking about that. In fact, most of the concepts in this passage are not hard to understand in our brains, but they are incredibly difficult to translate to your hands and your heart. In fact, I will say that your brain may struggle with it, but it's gonna struggle with it because your hands and your heart don't like what the word says. And before we read through this, verse by verse, I want to point something out. Jesus says, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your relatives. Now, some of you are, I won't ask you to raise your hand, are thinking, yes, I'm so tired of, it's September now, and Thanksgiving and Christmas are on their way, and we're like, oh, I have to see my brother-in-law, and, we face these things, but Jesus says something kind of crazy there. It appears on the surface that he's saying, don't feed your family, and don't have them over. Although it does say a luncheon or dinner, so maybe it's okay to have them for breakfast or something, But, and then he goes on, and if you expand it a little bit more, he says, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends. We hate that. Your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. Jesus is saying, you're pretty much inviting all the wrong people, right? I mean, doesn't that pretty much cover everybody that we invite over to our house? And the dinner that he's at was at a Pharisee's home, not just a Pharisee, a ruler of the Pharisee, which means it would have been a status thing. And probably, based on the text, it seems like he's probably sitting with lawyers and Pharisees, and he's saying, don't invite people like you. It's offensive, isn't it? So he is offending the host. He's offending the guests. In fact, we will see that he's offending the whole society. He's basically taking one of the underpinnings of the whole way they operate and the whole way they view the world, and he's saying, wrong, buzz. Survey says 0. Verse 1. Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. He was being carefully watched. Now, if you dig into this text, you'll find that it's not just watching because they're curious. That word is only used to imply suspicion. So it is a deal where they are watching him. And in fact, in Luke chapter 6, we have already been told that they were watching to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath. So there was already this sense that the Pharisees, that the leaders of the faith community were suspicious. And this is a crazy situation because he's being watched. And normally, most of us, if we're being watched, like I remember the first time I met Julie's parents, and just so you know, I was 20, she was 16. And so I was being carefully watched. And so I tried to behave, but that's not what Jesus does. Jesus says, you're watching me? Watch this. I'm way worse than you think I am. Now, it says when Jesus went to eat. This could also be as he was arriving or as he was going to eat. We talked a couple weeks ago about the fact that a house might have a courtyard, and the courtyard would be kind of semi-public. So it appears that as he's walking in, there was in front of him a man suffering, and the best translation there is from edema. He has a swelling of his body, and that's surprising that the man was there, because the assumption in that society was generally if you're sick, especially if you have something that's kind of disfiguring, that would have been a sign that there was something wrong with you. There was sin. And so it's surprising that he was there. In fact, a lot of people, a lot of scholars say it appears that they're setting Jesus up. Okay, it's on the Sabbath, and Jesus is coming in. Let's have this guy there, because that'll trap Jesus, and it'll force him to do something. They were setting him up, but he turns it around. I love that. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, Jesus is not stupid, okay? You probably know that already, but he is asking them a question that really backs them into a corner. Because if they said, no, it's not lawful, then they would sound uncaring. And if they said, yes, it's lawful, they would go against the whole trap that they had set. So they remained silent. It's interesting. Twice in here, we have Pharisees and lawyers who have nothing to say. And so taking hold of the man, Jesus heals him. And again, taking hold of the man. Jesus doesn't stand at a distance from people, physically or spiritually. He doesn't stand at a distance and throw him some medicine. He takes hold of the man, and he heals him and sends him away. Now, you might say, well, why is he sending him away? Well, sending him away in this situation would have been an act of mercy, because we've already seen in John 9, Jesus healed a blind man, and the Pharisees grabbed this guy and interrogated him. And so Jesus is like, I don't want this guy to be like the focus of this. I want him to get away. Then Jesus asked him, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into the well on Sabbath day, will you not pull it out? Now, Sabbath regulations in that time said it's okay to pull your oxen out in that kind of a situation. Interesting, it wasn't as clear that it's okay to pull your son out. So do with that what you want. But Jesus is saying, well, look, if it's okay to pull out, to care for an animal, what does that say about whether it's okay to care about a human being? And again, verse 6, they had nothing to say. Awkward. But Jesus isn't done making it awkward. In fact, if there was an awkward meter on the wall, Jesus is turning it up. And he says, he looks around and he notices the guests picking the places of honor at the table. And in that society, that would have been important. Where you sat mattered, because the closer you were to the head of the table, we know that James and John, their mom, comes to Jesus and says, hey, can my sons sit next to you? Where you sit matters. And he says, no, don't try to get to the top of the table. You know, sit lower. And now, this passage is pretty self-explanatory, but we should be humbled by it. I mean, honestly, don't you know in your heart that feeling of, I feel like I'm being kind of shoved off to the side. I'm not getting the attention I should get. I want them to say, thank you for what you did. That way I can be modest in front of everybody. It's kind of similar to Sally in the Charlie Brown Christmas cartoon. Do you remember this? She writes a letter to Santa Claus. She says, Dear Santa Claus, how have you been? Did you have a nice summer? How was your wife? I have been extra good this year, so I have a long list of presents that I want. Oh, brother, she says to Charlie Brown, please note the size. Oh, I'm sorry. Charlie Brown is reading this and he says, oh, brother. And Sally goes on and says, please note the size and color of each item and send as many as possible. If it seems too complicated, make it easy on yourself. Just send money. How about tens and 20s? And Charlie Brown says, tens and 20s? Oh, even my baby sister. And she responds, all I want is what I have coming to me. All I want is my fair share. And we know that feeling in our hearts, don't we? We want the recognition, the status, the comfort, the chair at the table that we think we deserve. But Jesus says over and over again, those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. In fact, in Philippians chapter 2, we are called to be like Jesus in our attitude, who left the throne of God, did not consider his status something to be held on to, but he made himself nothing. So Jesus has just offended all of them because he's basically pointing out what is happening as he speaks. And then he decides, I'm going to offend the host too. When you give a luncheon or dinner, and he's saying this to his host, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your sisters, your relatives. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, that sounds crazy to us, 1,000 times more crazy then, because it was a reciprocal society, which meant openly, I invite people over and then they invite back. If I buy a present for someone, there's a strong understanding that they would buy a similar present. And it was accepted that everybody liked that way. That was a foundation of society. And we're not that different, are we? I mean, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but how many of us have we're buying a present for a wedding and we're like, I want to make sure that the value of the present is more than they're spending on the meal? How many of us have ever opened a present and we thought to ourselves, the first thing we think is not, oh, how wonderful. The first thing we think is, I bought you something a lot cheaper, right? I mean, you've been there. And we have this reciprocal thing. If somebody invites you to their wedding or their daughter's wedding, you invite them back. That's the way we think. And Jesus says, don't think that way. Buy presents for people who have nothing. Invite people that can never, ever invite you back. And he's saying the blind, the lame, the poor, the crippled, the people that not only will not invite you back, but they can't because they don't have homes. He's not just saying welcome them if they show up either. He's saying invite them. Go to the people that make you uncomfortable, the people that stretch you, that are not like you, at least externally, and those are the people you should invite. Honestly, if any of us are getting above about a C on our report card on this one, I'm surprised. I'm not doing better than that. And it's not just about sharing food, it's about sharing your life. I mean, they had an accepted way in a wealthy home in those days. They didn't have a refrigerator, so they didn't Tupperware up their leftovers. At the end of a meal, they might go to the back door and hand food to beggars, because if a beggar, a poor person, heard that there was a big dinner going on, they would hang out by the back door. Or they would be on the street corner as beggars, and so the understanding was you toss the food to them. Or maybe you send a servant to take it to the corner. Jesus is saying, that's not enough. Invite them in. And if you think about this, you can't live up to this when we find some spare time. This is a command from Jesus that demands us to totally rearrange our priorities, our time, our money. And I was thinking about that. There was a time several times in my life, I have served at soup kitchens, and something about being behind the counter as the giver of food is safe. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy and wow, what a great thing I'm doing. And then they say, hey, we're done serving now. Why don't you go out and sit with the people? Grab a tray and just go be with them. You ever done that? It's way harder. Every year, and we've decided we're doing it again, we adopt a few families from Angels of Hope. As a church, we buy presents for the families of men who are incarcerated. And that's a beautiful thing. And it feels good. It's great, honestly, to go to Walmart and buy a few cheap gifts off a list and you're like, oh, I'm getting this shirt for a 12-year-old. I bet he'll love it. And that feels good. And then I remember when Julie and I drove to the house to deliver them. Awkward. But that woman that we delivered to, even though that was scary and hard, was so grateful. And we were able to connect as people and pray with her. And Jesus is saying, I know that it's easier to give from a distance, but don't. He's saying, invite people into your life. And they're looking around, and everybody there would have known that there were poor and blind and crippled and lame people right outside the house that weren't welcome. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Now, this guy, we don't know what his motive is, but he's following the normal procedure. Let's talk about the Bible. It's a religious person's house, and for some of us, Bible study is safer than real talk. And there's a legitimate question that isn't being asked. Why would we invite those people? I mean, honestly, why would we invite the poor, the lame, the blind, the crippled? Nobody asks it, but Jesus answers it anyway. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet." This is verse 16. I'm going to go on now. "And invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, Come, for everything is now ready. That was common in those days. You would invite a bunch of people and you would say, who can come? Who can come? You gather the RSVPs and you provide food based on that. And when the food is ready, you send it out. Say, okay, it's time. We're firing up the grill. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I bought a field. I must go and see it. Another said, I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Another said, I just got married, so I can't come. Those are all lame excuses. And the people sitting around the table with Jesus would have known that. The first one says, I bought a field. I must go and see it. You didn't look at it first? You bought a house sight unseen? No. I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Yeah, because you wouldn't check out the oxen first. You wouldn't go to see 5 yoke, which means 5 groups of 2, which means, one oxen and another oxen. Each pair needs to work well together. And otherwise, your rows are like this or like this, or, no. I just got married. I can't come. Now, there's all kinds of jokes that could be made about this. Part of it is, the wife won't let me go. But probably the point here is that in that society, men wouldn't really talk about their wives much in polite conversation. Lame excuses. And so this host is saying, I have all these people. I bought food, I butchered a cow and a goat, and I did all this. The food is ready, and you're canceling. Imagine if you're in that situation. The servant came back and reported it to the master. The owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Does that list sound familiar at all? The same 4 categories. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there's still room. The master told his servants, go out into the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in, so my house will be full. See, around any city, there would be people that because of their life or their brokenness or their finances, they weren't even in the city. They had a job that made them ritually unclean. They had a disease that made them stay at a distance. They had a job that meant they didn't have enough money to even the beggars would have a pecking order. The kind of better beggars would be in town. Jesus is saying, bring in those who are off the bottom of the scale. And then Jesus says, I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. Now, it's not really clear there whether my is referring to the host or referring to Jesus. Because the guy had just asked the question, oh, isn't it going to be awesome to have the banquet at the end when God establishes the kingdom? And Jesus says, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. You see, Jesus is answering the question, why would we invite those people? And there's two answers. Number one, that's who God invites. God invites. Now, notice, he does invite the wealthy and the healthy and all of that. But he says, I want to expand the table. So one answer, why would we invite them, is that's who God invites. But the other answer that's more personal probably for us is we need to invite the blind, the lame, the crippled, because that's who we are. I mean, God invited us. God invited me. God invited you. In fact, everybody say it with me. He included me. He included me. I mean, we are the poor. We have a debt we can't pay because we have sinned by nature and by choice over and over and over and over again, as if you... No, I won't go there. We are poor. Paul says he is the chief of sinners, and I don't know that any of us would say, Apostle Paul, me. We are the poor. We are the crippled. We are the ones who are unable to walk the path of righteousness. We are the ones that are crippled by our addictions and our baggage and our pain and our anger and our emotions and all of the stuff that has sometimes happened to us. Very often it's stuff we've done that has left us crippled. We are the blind. We are unable to see ourselves as broken. We are also unable so often to see ourselves as the beloved children of God. I mean, there are some of you in this room, and I know of some of you, but there are also others that play the game and put on the costume really well, and you would be like, oh yeah, I'm together, I'm fine. But deep in our hearts, in the darkness of our souls, we feel like, am I good enough? Does God love me? Could God invite me? And Jesus says, you have to understand that you are poor and crippled and blind and lame. We are the ones who are stumbling along the way, but Jesus carries us anyway. Why would we invite those people? Because that's who God invites, and that's who we are. Now, you might say, well, but I don't have time to have people over, and we can talk about that more in a couple weeks, or next week, I think. But I want to remind you, you might say, I don't cook. Well, Aurelio's delivers. It's so much work. Well, you're eating anyway, and usually when we make a meal a lot of work, it's because we don't think that, well, it's often because I want to look good for them. My house isn't clean. I love you, but get over yourself. I don't have space. Do it somewhere else. The answer to all of those excuses or reasons, the answer to all of them is that Jesus says, be my ambassador. I have several friends that are pastors of multi-campus churches. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome how you can multiply your impact because you have multiple campuses. You know what? I don't know. I haven't done the math here, but we have at least in this room 30 campuses of Thorn Creek Church this morning. Your house and your house and your house and your apartment and your seat, your job, your health club. You see, Jesus said, just go out and love people. Invite them into your life. Get uncomfortable and love them. I mean, we think that the way you build a church, the way you reach people for Christ is programs. That's great, but why didn't Jesus think of that? Jesus says, just love people. When people are coming on Wednesday night, serve them a meal so they have time. And I want to close and then give you a homework assignment. Quite a while ago, there was a child born to a woman, I believe in Michigan. And because of some circumstances, she wasn't able to keep him. And she put him up for adoption. And Dan was invited as a baby to a seat at the table of Warren and Gay Evans. And I was thinking yesterday, how ironic is it? Dan is a young man, those of you that are visitors. Dan grew up here, and he is now pastor of a church in a prison in South Dakota. And you know why he is the pastor telling people about Jesus and not an inmate in that prison? Because somebody offered him a seat at the table. Now, I'm not asking you to go out and adopt a child this afternoon. Dan received the grace of Jesus through the grace of Warren and Gay. And when they see this, they will think I've said way too much about them. But they're in Kansas, so it's safe. I don't think Jesus is saying don't feed your family. He's not saying we shouldn't spend quality time with dear friends. He's not even saying don't be nice to rich people. He's saying make the circle bigger. And some of that could be people in this room. Your assignment for this week is to eat with someone. Maybe your neighbor. Maybe someone in this room. I mean, there are those of us, and we know who we are. You know, there are people that are alone, and they have lost their wife or their husband, and they would love to eat with somebody, right? And there are people that are struggling, and maybe your neighbor, maybe somebody in this room, maybe somebody that God has been laying on your heart. Maybe you could come on a Wednesday night and help serve some families. This is not hard to understand. It's just hard. It's just hard. And as we celebrate communion next week, as I close in prayer now, I think it's appropriate for us to confess that we, along with many things that we have failed to do, we have often failed to